Chapter 4, You Are Not Alone. In the beginning of this book, I asked the question, how can grace be multiplied? I want to share with you another way grace can abound. Keep in mind that this is not a positive way to get grace or a path that we should pursue. Yet it gives us hope that God's grace shines even in the darkness. Paul once told the church in Rome, but where sin abounded, grace abounded much more. Romans 5, verse 20. Many times when we sin, we feel that God is far away from us. Yes, sin does separate us from God, but because of the cross, we can now live and have fellowship with Him. When you fall into a big pit, you are going to need a big rope. So where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more. Wow, that is amazing. Even in our darkest moments, God is there. When we have failed and we feel emotions of guilt and shame, God is whispering, "My grace is greater." Many times we think that when a corporate executive or a leader sins, the news is quick to say he fell from grace. Yet according to this verse in Romans, where sin abounds, grace abounds much more. So, when you sin, you do not fall from grace, you fall into grace. This does not mean that we should purposely sin. It does not mean that but it does mean that God is greater than our struggles. Here's a dad joke for you. Why doesn't Jesus wear jewelry? Well, he breaks every chain. The book of Romans tells us, for a righteous man falls 7 times and rises again. Proverbs 24, verse 16. How do you see yourself today? Why does a righteous man get back up? Because he knows who he is. I believe that there's an abundance of grace for us today, and it is time for us to realize it. So when we sin and we are in our darkest moments, that is when God picks us up. When Adam and Eve sinned, God did not stay away from them. Instead, he went after them and said, "Where are you?" Again, when Cain sinned and killed his brother, God went after him and spoke out and said, "Where is your brother?" Genesis 4:9. Time and time throughout the Bible, God's grace abounded when people sinned. This word for abound is 2 Greek words in one. The first is the word huper, which is where we get the English word hyper. The next word is pleienzo, which this simply means abundance or to increase. So when we have these 2 words, we can see this as huper perizo, which simply means to abound beyond measure, to abound exceedingly, or to superabound. It can be easy to magnify sin, but God wants us to magnify His grace. Yes, you may fall and you may make a mistake, but you have to get back up. In the moments when we feel alone in a deep pit of sin, God is throwing a rope to us. He's throwing a rope of grace to pick us up. Stand back and remember that sin is not your identity any longer.